of our neighbors have logged in, and I see that that we are in fact recording this meeting. So with that in mind, I'll just call this whiz bang operation to order. And just before we go to our roll call, I just wanted to comment that one of the triumphs that we've mentioned that we've enjoyed in the last couple of months has involved the trash containers and the associated mess and disruption in the Manzano Mesa area. And the solid waste department has acted to remove the containers, but we just can't seem to get beyond human nature. And so some of the folks who have things they don't want at home have been taking it over to the Little League field now. So that's another issue that we'll have to be addressing. You just can't seem to get everybody agreeing and acting in the same public spirited manner at any time. Okay, so let's start with a roll call of panel members and the establishment of a quorum. I'm going to go through and call each person by their first and family names, and then I'll go back and ask if you want to just say a few words, maybe up to 10 words in your own defense, and I'll just call you by first name. So let's start pretty much alphabetically with Andre Wynn.
Present.
Graham Boken.
Present.
Judy Young.
Present.
Paul Robert Cedillo. And David Soik.
Present.
And Josephine Martinez. And she was sort of here earlier, but I guess she slipped away again. And
Yeah, she's present. She just doesn't have her microphone on.
Okay, I don't see her name on the.
Yeah, she sent me a text saying that she had logged in. Maybe she's having technical difficulty.
Maybe she got logged into the public area. Kelly can check on that.
Okay.
And then Vance Cabela is here. Now I see Josephine right there now. That's excellent. Idalia, is Idalia here? I don't yet see Idalia, so Idalia is so far missing in action, and I'm Bob Carlton. And so again, I'll just quickly go through, and if you'd like to say a few words, Andre?
Hello, everyone. Andre Wynn. I'll be monitoring the chat. So I know that we had Mark ask a question about Q&A or the chat function. Please use the chat function, and I'll have everything coming through on one stream. Thanks.
Excellent. Graham?
Yes. Hi, I'm Graham Bokett. Been in Albuquerque for about 3 years, moved from further north, Pecos area, where I lived for about 22 years, and now I'm live near the intersection of Montgomery and Tramway.
Okay, thank you. Judy?
Yes, I'm Judy Young, and I've been working diligently on behalf of Albuquerque in a lot of different ways, starting with writing the grant to start the Cancer Research and Treatment Center for $92 million, and then starting the first publicly funded domestic violence program in the United States with Phil Chacon, which went to every single state in the United States. And so I'm really, really concerned about Albuquerque and the direction that it is going. And so I have several concerns tonight that I would like to address. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
Hello, everyone. Paul Cedillo. I'm the Small Business Program Manager at Sandia National Laboratories. Lived in Albuquerque my entire life, and I think I love the city. I love the state, but I think we need some work, and so I'm happy to be a part of this team and on the board to ensure that we do everything we can to get the city back on track, because I think we have slipped in some areas, but I think we can help, and I think that's why we're all here today.
Excellent. Thank you. David?
Dave Zoik. I've lived in Albuquerque for 40 plus years, retired from Sandia National Laboratories, where I did research and systems analysis. And I'm here for the same reason I think everybody else is, to try to make Albuquerque a better place to live.
Okay, thank you, sir. We get a little confirmation bark there in the background from somebody. Josephine? Maybe she isn't able to reach. There she goes.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I'm having trouble with my iPad tonight. I'm here.
Okay. And Vance, did you have something you wanted to say?
You speaking to me?
Yep. Yep. Did you have a few words you wanted to say? No?
Certainly, Vance Cabela. I've been in Albuquerque most of my life, went to the military for 10 years, was a master at arms, been back in Albuquerque after that stint, and love the city, love the culture, and enjoying the CPC, the interaction of you guys and Kelly and everybody else that been involved to try to do some improvements and work with the police department and make some things happen so people are feeling a little bit better about our community.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vance. And
Thank you.
And I'm Bob Carlton, and been up here in the next to the foothills for 16 years now, and actually 17 years now. Wow, time flies. And I'm certifiably old now, so that, if that counts for anything, that's about all I care to say tonight. And the Dahlia is missing in action tonight. So moving along, the agenda was circulated, published, and on the, I believe on the 4th of July. And hi, Dahlia, good to see you. We'll mark you as present.
Thank you.
And the agenda was published on the 4th of July, and I've heard no objection. If there is any objection to accepting it now, will somebody please comment? Otherwise, I will say it's been approved by acclamation. Okay, it's been approved. The agenda has been approved by acclamation. Approval of the minutes of the June Foothills Forum. They were provided to us by Martisa and Kelly's office, and they look fine to us. And we invited Martisa to publish them on our website. And so again, if I hear no objection, I'm going to say that the minutes of the June Foothills Forum have been approved unanimously. Hearing no objections, they were approved unanimously. New and unfinished business. First one, Kelly, have you enabled screen sharing for me? Maybe Kelly went away. Did you?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to try to share the screen. Let's see if I can do this. Document. Unfortunately, the things came up on, oh, I know what I can do. I'm going to just share and post. Oops. Nope, nope. I have to go back. This is a learning experience every month. Okay, so here's first one is a resolution. Foothills Community Policing Council resolution, July 12th, concerning Idalia. So Idalia, you don't vote on this. Idalia Lechuga Tena, a resident of the Foothills Area Command and an applicant for membership in the Foothills Community Policing Council, having expressed a strong interest in joining our council and having contributed to the work of our council, is hereby declared to be a member of our council. Her term shall run through the end of 2023, at which time she may be eligible to serve one additional term. And I'm going to quickly call the roll to see if everybody formally approves. Andre?
I approve.
David?
I approve.
Graham?
I approve.
Josephine?
I approve.
Judy?
Yes.
Paul?
I approve.
And Vance?
Yes.
And Robert, and I approve. So the resolution is passed and will be forwarded to uh, Kelly and his team for posting and for adding Idalia to our membership. And congratulations, and thank you, Idalia, for joining us.
Thank you all.
Congratulations, Dahlia.
Thank you so much, and thank you for allowing me to join you guys. I'm honored.
Glad to have you. Okay, next issue is a resolution, or a recommendation rather. And this is, I wrote this one. It's not the hugest matter in the whole world, but it concerns police vehicle selection, appearance, and equipment. And it's basically a resolution because the present appearance of APD vehicles is a mishmash of vehicle designs and appearance. No one we've spoken to at APD seems to know the underlying concept. It's most likely that there's no real policy or goal. The present situation seems to just be something that sort of developed. We have white cars with red and blue. We have black and white cars harking back to the 50s. We even have some sort of a bluish thing with faint silvery decals. We've asked who's in charge, and no one seems to know. And no one knows the purpose of the various colors. It isn't even clear whether there's a purchasing authority that makes department-wide decisions on a long-term basis. We recommend that our police department vehicles present the same appearance and have the same basic system of lights and identifying systems and symbols, except for undercover vehicles, and that these systems remain constant for an extended period, not just a few months, but maybe more like a decade. And the idea behind that is that residents and visitors need to be able to identify with certainty whether a vehicle is an authorized police vehicle or not. If a driver sees flashing lights behind them at night, a uniform system of lighting will give them confidence that it's an official vehicle. And the other relating thing is that in an emergency, people need to be able to tell whether or not which vehicle is a police vehicle. So that's the recommendation. And again, I'd like to ask our members to indicate whether they continue to be in agreement with this recommendation. Andre?
I agree.
Judy?
I agree.
Paul,
I agree.
David,
I agree.
Graham,
Yes.
Agree,
Vance,
agree.
Josephine,
I agree.
Idalia,
Agree.
and Bob Carlton agrees. So we will again submit this. We may not be accurate, but sometimes, I hate to say it this way, but sometimes the getting accurate information from the police and from our city administration is more difficult than pulling teeth. So if there is something wrong with what our recommendation includes, then I hope they will provide corrective information. So having gone through that, it's time for an APD update.
Bob, real quick, before we
Yep.
transition off that topic, Mark Byrne actually had a question, and he said, it looks like, we had a CPC chair meeting and we came up with these recommendations. Could you describe the process that we use to come up with the recommendations and how we propose them forward?
Some of the recommendations that we have made in the past have been generated by members of the public who brought them to the attention of one or more members of the CPC panel. The person on the CPC council who receives or conceives of the notion begins a process of developing the idea or the question, and at some point brings it to the attention of the other members of the panel. If there is public information that is available or public participation, not public, but if there's city administrative participation that is available, we pursue that as we did with the solid waste issues. And as we did with the Parks and Recreation and with police surveillance of various locations. Then after we develop a recommendation to that point, we decide whether or not it's worth pursuing with a formal recommendation. And once we do that, we write it as a formal recommendation, discuss it, and then when we're ready to take action, we do like tonight, we bring it forward and indicate our approval or disapproval, and then submit it to Kelly. We have not always been able to get things published. There's been a lot of difficulty with getting the city to acknowledge our recommendations, but I think that those difficulties have been resolved now, and that the recommendation that we passed tonight will rather quickly appear along with all of the other 10 or 12 that we have passed within the last 18 months will appear on our website for public consideration. So that's where we are. That's where we're at, and we do try to follow up, as is evidenced with the issues that we've raised with street racing, which have shown a definite improvement in the last 2 months, which a lot of credit goes to Commander Collins and his team, but we understand that that's also become a citywide effort. And I can't speak to what's happening on the west side or in the valley, but it's certainly been a lot more pleasant up here in the foothills area with regard to street racing and loud aggregations for the last 2 months. So that's been great. So I hope that answers the question. I didn't intend to go on that long, but I think it was a good question and worthwhile.
Thank you, Bob. Kelly?
Yeah, by the way, Bob and members of the Foothills CPC, we did have a meeting with the city this morning as to sort of redefine the recommendation process. And we didn't get the total flow chart done, but what we're going to do from now on is that all CPC recommendations will go to the same person within the within APD, and she will disseminate them out to where she feels they need to go. And they've made a commitment on getting them back in a timely fashion. And also, we will go back to having recommendation reports by a member of APD once the recommendation is decided, if the council wants to have a report on what the recommendation entailed and to what the response was going to be. So, and we would also be getting a monthly Excel sheet as to recommendation status. So.
Okay, well, that's useful information, Kelly. I didn't know that was a meeting this morning. And along with that, all of us here on the Foothills CPC agree that it's almost no, excuse me, let me rephrase that. There's almost no chance that any issue that we might raise is solely within the purview of the police department. Everything involves multiple agencies, whether it's lighting on our streets or crosswalks or unhoused people or drug sales or whatever. The police don't have sole jurisdiction. So all of these issues are things that that whoever's catching our recommendation may have to include 4 or 5 or more agencies, and those are issues that are way beyond the scope of a group of volunteers such as ourselves to figure out. So so this is an evolving process, and thank you, Kelly, for that update on this morning's meeting. Okay.
And could I add that, you know, the speaker tonight, Mike Butler, he showed firsthand with his experience and how he actually did it with coordinating the police with all the city agencies. So the speaker tonight will speak to how all of this can come together in a very effective way.
Yep. Thanks for bringing that up, Judy. That's important. And that puts Mike Butler on the hot seat a little bit more than he might have expected. He's easy. He's been on the hot seat before, I'm sure. Okay, next item on our agenda, if I can move right along, is the APD update. Commander Collins, I timed that perfectly so that you were drinking a little bit of coffee.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. It's nice to see everyone again. I hope you all had a good 4th. It's hard to believe that it's already July. It just seems like we just got into 2021, but it's moving quickly. So real quick, I'll go into kind of reiterate some of the stuff that was on the newsletter. So for our CAD calls for service in specific areas, we had 9 commercial robberies. We did not have any residential robberies or what is also known as home invasions. We did have 2 carjackings. We had 7 robberies to an individual, 56 auto theft calls for service. None of those were warm-ups, which is what's to be expected this time of year. 15 commercial burglary calls, 22 residential burglary calls, 42 auto burglary calls. And we were, for the month of June, at 3 guns stolen as a result of auto burglary. So again, we're better. It's not zero, but it's much better than we've seen in years past. So my compliments to everybody who did not have their weapons taken in an auto burglary. That's getting better. So let's keep trying on that. We did have a couple things go on. As Samantha, she's really working hard to deal with some of the crime-free properties and crime-free multi-housing zones in our area. She's even begun to have some Zoom courses for that to certify as many properties as she can. Because we know that some of the hotels, motels, and the larger family units may have some challenges regarding crime. And I think if we're a little more proactive in addressing this with the ownership of these properties, that might help us resolve some of those problems. So I'm really looking forward as this to start kicking off. It's in its infancy, but she's working really, really hard to develop this program up here for the Foothills. I believe we will be starting here shortly as soon as we can all get our schedules kind of squared away. We're thinking about starting some coffees with cops again. We kind of missed those since COVID, and those are always nice events that we could sit down with everybody and just chat. I mean, sometimes it's good to just talk. So, excuse me, my dog's going. Sorry about that. Wallace. Looking forward to National Night Out, which is on August 3rd. So myself, some of the other command staff in the Foothills, and some of the officers will be visiting some of the neighborhood associations that have registered on the website with that. So again, that's August 3rd. So that's literally pretty much right around the corner. And the other thing I wanted to fill you all in on is that we are going to be having our annual bid coming up in, well, actually, I believe lieutenants bid this Wednesday, sergeants the following week, and officers the week after that. So for those of you who don't know, APD engages in what we call a bid, and that's where each of the lieutenants, sergeants, and officers can choose based on seniority, the area command and where they work, the supervisor that they work for, and their hours. It's pretty challenging, and from what I've learned over the years, we're one of the few agencies that actually still continues to do that. But our officers seem to like it. It gives them ability to change around a little bit, or we have some officers that will stay in an area command for years. So there's kind of arguments for both, but that'll be coming up. I believe the bid will take effect. So all the officers that bid into the area command in the next few weeks will then start at the end of August. And it looks like the bid schedules are out. We'll be going days and swing shift. We'll be going to a 5/8 schedule, which will provide 2 squads per day for each shift in this area command. And they have reworked the lieutenant schedules, so that way we always have a lieutenant that is on duty at least, and the goal was to have at least 2 lieutenants on duty on each shift. So 1 lieutenant could be in the Southwest, 1 could be in the Foothills, and the lieutenants have begun kind of floating around the city in the event that there's a larger critical incident, or there might be a use of force that might need to be do an on-scene investigation. It's not uncommon that on weekends we'll pull lieutenants from other area commands to have them come handle something maybe up in the Foothills if a Foothills lieutenant isn't working. Because prior to that, we used to do what was called the weekend lieutenant, and every area command rotated every 6 weeks. So the day swing and grave lieutenant for that area command was pretty much in charge of the entire city on Saturday and Sunday. So this schedule actually alleviates that. So for example, my day shift lieutenant will be working a 410 schedule on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So he will have Thursday, Friday, Saturday off. The Southwest day shift lieutenant may have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday off. So it's a rotation of lieutenants. So there's always lieutenants available. Let's see. Oh, so Deputy Chief Donovan Olvera has announced that he is retiring at the end of the month. And in his place, the Valley Area Commander, Josh Brown, has been upgraded to the acting deputy chief position, at least until December, is what we're told. But he will be in charge of field services. Really good commander, so I'm kind of excited to work with him. I'll miss Donnie in the same breath, but I'm also excited to work with Commander, well, now acting Deputy Chief Brown. There's been some other changes in the department. Corey Lowe, we all remember Corey Lowe. She was the compliance commander and then went to IFD. In fact, I believe she spoke on a couple of occasions for the CPC. She's going to actually be in charge. She's upgraded to deputy chief and in charge of the compliance division or compliance bureau. So she'll be over all things compliance. Deputy Chief Eric Garcia was put in charge of Internal Affairs Force Division and Internal Affairs IAPS Professional Standards. I'm trying to think what else. I know there was another one. Commander Dennis DeFoya, who is currently the investigations commander with homicide, robbery, sex crimes, MATF. He's actually going to keep that, but he will also take over the crime lab because the crime lab and our investigations division really complement each other. So it made sense to have him oversee one, and he will have a deputy commander under him that will work in each of those divisions. And then let's see. I think that's all I have for tonight.
Okay, and thank you very much.
Welcome.
Do we have some hot questions? Because I'd like to ask Sergeant Silva if he had, and his team are recruiters and they'd like to give us a little update. So Andre, can I go ahead and ask Sergeant Silva, or did you have?
There actually is one question, Bob, from Catherine. She asked, will we be able to get a new staff listing for chiefs and duty lieutenants?
So I know this is kind of hard because she's on chat, but are we talking like who it is or hours worked? I guess I'm confused.
I'm guessing that and that she is looking for a chain of command or an outline diagram of the staffing. Those are updated on the city APD website as in real time, aren't they?
They should be, yes. And yeah, definitely the executive staff is. And I will check to see if the area command websites are updated, but those should be as well. So as soon as the new bid takes effect or the new bid they sign up, then we'll know who's actually going where, because we're not entirely sure because some days have changed and it doesn't work with some people's schedules. So they may move around the city a little bit. So we won't know that until probably a good 3 weeks from now.
Could I also ask you, Commander Collins, regarding the business alliance that you had spoken of 3 months ago that was going to be formed so that we could do very proactive work, for example, no trespassing signs, cameras, so on and so forth, with the businesses in the area. So I did speak with the manager of Sprouts today, and he said that he had not been contacted at all regarding a business alliance.
Right. So our initial push, because we're kind of limited, we're trying to get the one that was falling in line with Lieutenant Altman's project down in Hotel Circle. And so as we get that put together, we're going to start mirroring that with more of the businesses up on East Central. So we're getting there, but we're just not quite there yet.
Okay,
One last question, Bob.
Yes, Andre?
So Commander Collins, you mentioned coffee with cops. Do you know when and where those will be held?
Not yet. We're going to schedule those as soon as we are able to, and they'll be posted on. I think Samantha will post those on Nextdoor. If I were speaking, yes, they will be posted on Nextdoor. So just give us a little bit of time, and we'll start getting those out and make sure everybody knows about them. We're just not sure exactly when or where. We have to nail down some times.
Great, thank
So,
you.
Commander Collins, I'm also concerned about some of the crime statistics because I did speak with the district manager of 7-Eleven Alon at Tramway and Central. And he basically said that they are calling on almost a daily basis. And yet the statistics are showing that they have not made a call in a year. Basically, just to give you an example, on July the 4th, there was a woman wielding a machete, and it was should have been listed as a violent crime, and yet that's not showing up on the statistics.
Which statistics are you looking at, Judy?
I'm just looking at the ones that are online with, you know, the website that we go to different areas and it gives you, but I also talked with Lieutenant Garrett and asked him for the specific statistics regarding the Alon, because what we're concerned about more than anything else is that there are many people who are buying alcohol, a lot of people buying alcohol, and they're not having to show ID. That's one problem in the area. But, you know, there's another area regarding the transport, because buses are coming at 12:30 at night and dropping off as many as 30 people. And many of these are inebriated. And so I do have a video showing that at 12:30 at night. So, you know, we are concerned that there really shouldn't be buses in the area past 10 o'clock at night at the very latest, but to be dropping off large groups of people at 12:30 at night puts the entire area in harm's way.
What kind of buses are dropping people off that way? Are they city buses?
Yes, city buses.
Oh, geez. And are they dropping them off at the Winona bus
Yes,
stop?
yes.
Okay.
So that is, I believe, where our problem is, and where arson and so many of the crimes are being committed when people are sound asleep. And so this, you know, this is a problem that I guess we're going to have to address and draw up a recommendation.
Well, before you,
regarding
I
transit.
think,
Okay.
before you go through that, let me get a hold of the transit or the
Would
transit
you?
director
Thank you. Yes.
and see what's going on with that. And because that is the first I have heard of that kind
Yes.
of practice. So, and
Judy,
then to touch on the statistics, are you looking on crimemapping.com?
Yes.
Okay, so sometimes, which is why reporting statistics is very, very difficult to do. Sometimes the CADs, the way that the information is relayed to the 911 or the 242 cops operators, it may not reflect what you know. Because I can tell you from many years of experience, when we get dispatched to a call, we get on scene, it is nothing like what the call said it was. So, and crime mapping pulls just the CAD. So whatever came in, if it came in as a disturbance call, it's going to just show up as a disturbance. It may not show up as an aggravated assault because that's a completely different code. So take that with a grain of salt when you look at crime mapping, because really the only accurate statistics are the ones that have to go through records, they get vetted, and the investigation has been completed. So that's why when I give you all numbers every month, those are just straight up calls for service that have been coded, but I can't without looking at each individual one, I can't tell you, like, for the 56 auto thefts, if that was actually an auto theft, because I'm just looking at the CAD. It's a kind of a good measure for me because I have an idea of what's being called in a specific area, and especially if it clusters, then I know obviously I have a problem. But until it's fully investigated and fully vetted by records, I can't call it a statistic at that point. So, and that's kind of the disclaimer that we put on the newsletter, just to show, because I don't want to get any confusion on that. So just, I understand what you're saying, but just take those with a grain of salt, because crime mapping, it's not 100% accurate until that stuff's been vetted and fully investigated.
So we did have an emergency meeting on Friday, July the 2nd.
Mhm.
And so have you been briefed by Lieutenant Garrett regarding that emergency community meeting?
Yes.
Okay, so, one of the things that was brought up over and over again by community members was the busing situation. And Danny Holcomb is the transit director. So should we engage with him, or did you say that you were going to contact him? How would you direct us in that manner?
Let me ask him. I've spoken with him before on an unrelated issue. So let me talk to him and see what I'll call him tomorrow to find out what's going on with that and share
Thank you.
the concern that you have with this, because that just doesn't make, I don't know where I don't think the bus service ran that late. I mean, I'm not a,
We didn't either. We didn't
Yeah,
either. And,
it's weird.
for that many buses, this is really a death trap right there at Winona and Tramway. And we have brought that forth, before city hearings, quasi judicial hearings on 8 different occasions. And we're not getting any relief. And not only are we not getting any relief, but the situation is becoming so dire that, we have to do something. So we're asking for your help, and any way that you could help us, we would really appreciate it.
Sure.
Judy,
I
could
know
you,
we've been talking about it for 3 years, so I'm happy to call him.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
could you please forward that video to Commander Collins so that he
Yes.
before? Okay, and then we're gonna move along, I think.
Well, Bob, can I chime in real quick since we're on that topic?
If it's pretty quick, thank you, Vance.
10 seconds. Commander Collins, I've noticed in the last 2 weeks an influx of new individuals on the Winona and Central Corridor, different prostitutes, a lot of other gang members. They're really filling in that corner of the Icon Theater, the Sprouts, the Smiths. It's heavily populated with these people really infiltrating about 6 p.m. till 10 p.m. at night. I got a call from a friend that was pumping gas at Smith's about 4 days ago. There was a gentleman that went ahead and put his hand on her and asked her for money, one of the vagrants there. She was afraid, so she called me. I live in Fort Hills. I drove up there, was there in 3 minutes, could not locate him, but I saw the security guards were moving people out of Smith's. And I drove into the Icon Theater, the Sprouts Theater, and all the other security guards were moving multiple peoples out of those parking lots. We need to get a heavy presence in there, in that corridor and those parking lots as soon as possible, because you have a new bloodline of people that are just taking over there because there's no, there's nothing happening, no arrest. I mean, I'm sure there's some, but I would just ask that you guys start saturating that area if you can.
Will do, sir. Thank you for that information. I appreciate that.
Appreciate you, Commander.
Okay, thank you, Vance, and thank you, Commander Collins.
You're welcome.
Sergeant Silva, do you have a few words you'd like to say about the recruiting process and your successes and challenges?
Sure. So I just wanted to go over what we're up to. Right now, we're recruiting for our PSA class. That's next month. We're just finishing up, trying to fill that class. So if you know anybody that would like to be a police service aide, please refer them. Minimum qualifications are that they have to have a high school diploma or GED, a driver's license. They have to be at least 18 years old and be a U.S. citizen or have a valid work permit. and that's for the PSA class next month. For the current class that's in right now, we have 50 that are making their way through it.
Did we lose your audio, Sergeant Silva? Looks like you're still hooked in, but we're not hearing you. We'll
Okay,
give it a couple more seconds.
let me know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, so what was the last thing you heard?
Last thing we heard was that you started to talk about the 50 people in your class.
Okay, so the current class that's seated, 50 cadets are making the way through that class. They're about halfway through. Lateral 26 class, there's 6 that are seated and making their way through that class. That should be done next month. And for our CNM class, we have fully seated it. We have 22 officers in that class. And we have a lateral to look at applications for that one, but they don't have anybody seated yet. They still haven't got through backgrounds. And for the December class, we're trying to seat 70 cadets. So we got a huge challenge. We just want to get as many in that class as possible. I think the challenges that we're seeing are that people still think you need a college degree to be a police officer, and that's just not true. You have to have at least a high school diploma or GED and all the other qualifications.
And I believe the one class that you mentioned, the Central Community College, is the class that's running in parallel with your academy, and it's being run at the community college. Is that correct?
That's correct. And that just started last year they started running some cadets through CNM. And so that's a great resource to get an extra class in. Classroom space does become an issue, and we have so much training with officers. So.
Okay, and we're having some audio problems with your connection, Pete. Is there any last words before we move along?
No, I think that about covers it. Sorry that you're having audio issues, but I'm always available for questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sergeant Silva. And we certainly appreciate your efforts. And I think many of us have noted the dramatic change in the last several months in the tone and content of your advertising. So we're welcoming that and hoping that it's being increasingly successful. Thank you very much. Okay, moving right along, we do have a special guest tonight. And if there's no objection, I think it is time and past time to give Mike Butler, retired chief of police from Longmont, Colorado. I drove through there a couple of weeks ago. It was quite a delightful excursion. I had not been through Longmont in 50 years. So my memory of Longmont of days of old were kind of fuzzy at this point, but we're glad to have you with us. And I think we're just going to ask you to take center stage and have at it, Chief Butler. And you are still on.
Well, hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Mike Butler. Yeah, I left Longmont Public Safety about a year ago. I'm honored to be here tonight, and I enjoyed the interaction that you all had with Albuquerque Police, Commander Collins and Sergeant Silva. I first of all, I want to thank all of you for being a part of the South, I forget what it is, South CPC.
Will be Foothills.
Foothills CPC. And thank you all very much for providing the kind of citizenship you're providing in your area. And I also want to say thank you to Commander Collins and Sergeant Silva for their participation in this meeting as well, and for their willingness to interact to the level that they do to give you as much information as possible. My take is there's a level of transparency there that perhaps other police departments could learn from in terms of having personal interaction with your people who have a lot of authority to make decisions. So thank you, Commander and Sergeant. Longmont Public Safety. I oversaw police, fire, a few other social service divisions, and it's kind of a unique design and setup in terms of our public safety entity that oversees all the public safety services in Longmont. Where I want to start tonight is, I don't want to start with a resume. I want to start with a little bit of pain in terms of what happened in Longmont. We were a pretty high crime area, high crime city in this state. Tremendous amounts of domestic violence, tremendous amounts of lethal domestic violence, lots of gang activity. We get more social services in Longmont even today per capita than just about any other city along the northern Front Range. We're about 35% Hispanic, very diverse community. We've had crime rates were significantly high at one point in our community. And I just want to start off by saying that that's where we were at. And when I began my work as a police chief, I first started as a police chief in Longmont. I want to say that the culture within Longmont Police, I don't know how else to describe it other than it was primitive. We were a faceless entity within our community. We hid behind this fortress. It was a constant dynamic of circling the wagons in terms of ensuring that what happened within the police department did get known in the community, and the partnerships that we had with people in our community were few, very, very few. The police officers that we had were hired in an era that was, an era that was kind of very enforcement oriented. And I want to talk a little bit about that in terms of some history that I think provides context for why police are the way they are, in our country. And I want to say that often the police are placed into the middle of circumstances around how a community is going to respond to various social and health issues, or the residuals of those social and health issues. And so for decades, we dealt with those health and social issues by basically criminalizing them. And we passed laws and stiffened penalties, as if passing those laws and stiffening those penalties would serve as an insurance policy that might protect us from the human condition. We thought that 3 strikes and you're out, and getting tough on crime and putting people in jail and invoking our criminal justice system was the answer. And so I want to just say, for decades, that was the response. And you can go back and look at history in just about every state in this country, and you will see over time, that's how it flowed. That's how it evolved. And so now we have all these laws on the books, and we have all these expectations of police, and many communities still do. And I will also say that police chiefs and police administrators, also fire chiefs did this as well, would go into the community and say, hey, if you need us, call us for anything. Well, basically most communities took, if not all communities, took their police departments up on that. And what grew out of that was this kind of unhealthy dependency on police to deal with all the issues that no other entity could or would deal with. Keep in mind that public safety in the vast majority, if not all communities, is probably your only 24/7 public service agency in those communities. Most other agencies have or departments or city departments or other nonprofits, most have Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 hours. Well, we know, and you heard tonight, some of the concerns you have, that there's a lot of social and health issues that are kind of deemed as criminal that occur outside of that Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 existence. And so that's a little bit of context for why the police are the way they are in this country today. And so now there's been this kind of shift towards, well, we need something different. And what I'm going to tell you is there's no question in my mind that there needs to be transformation and a resetting, rethinking, recalibrating of what goes on in the police profession. I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. But I'm also going to talk about what I think is more important, and that is community transformation. Something that has to occur in our communities so that they're not as dependent on, I'll say, government at large, but specifically police departments. Because the police, and I can tell you, I know exactly what's going on in the commander's head right now when he hears a lot of these issues. You know, at 10 o'clock at night, 12:30 at night, you're one street, you're one area that's now loaded with folks who are unsheltered, homeless, or gang members. This commander, he's going to probably go out and try to figure out how to, the request was to saturate those areas. Well, guess what happens to those people? They go to another area. And so there may be another CPC in another part of town that's going to go to their commander. If this commander chooses to say, well, let's go saturate that area. That's what happens all across America. And let me also tell you a little bit about some kind of how effective the criminal justice system is. And I'm giving you this pain part of this so that I want you to understand that what has to happen, as we're going to talk about this, is much bigger than just shifting what goes on in police. Although the shifts in police need to occur. A few years ago, we did a study in Longmont, and I will say this study can be done anywhere. But we looked at the hundreds of people that we arrested in 1 year for, the commander called them car burglary. Up here, we call them first-degree criminal trespasses, or house burglaries, or invasions, or vandalisms. And we went back and looked at the history of those folks that we arrested that 1 year, the hundreds of people that we arrested that 1 year for those crimes. We found out that on average, each of those people had been arrested 9 times prior to that year and had 16 charges filed against them prior to that year. Anyone in police will tell you that they see the same people over and over again, with exceptions, but it's not. And so here we have people who've been arrested, have been charged, have been through the criminal justice system over and over and over again. And I would ask any of you, none of us want to live our lives that way. At least I hope we don't. If we have a problem with our car and take it to a mechanic, and they don't get it right 9 times, are we going to take it back a 10th time? That's in essence what goes on. And so we don't ask that question of the larger criminal justice system in terms of its capacity to deal with the health and social issues that occur in any community or the residuals of those. And we're still living in a time where get tough on crime, 3 strikes and you're out, let's pass laws, let's stiffen penalties. We're still living with the after effects of all of that in terms of saying, here's how we're going to address all these issues. We want more cops. We want more this. We want more prisons. That's still at some level going on. And I heard it in some of your requests tonight, and requests are all valid. There's no question, because here's the issue. Albuquerque, not unlike any other community in this country, is not designed or set up yet to deal with these issues in an alternative way. You're still stuck in the mode of invoking the criminal justice system. And so that's the only recourse. That's the only thing that the vast majorities of community can do. I'm here to tell you that there's more things communities can do. And what I recommend in a lot of my conversations with people across the country when I make these kinds of presentations is that community by community, that you need to sit down and talk about what are the bigger issues in your community. And I kind of frame them in terms of health and social issues, but they're addiction, mental health, homelessness, a swirling mess of all three of those. Judy mentioned domestic violence and the pervasiveness of that in most communities. At one point, I declared domestic violence in our community the #1 public safety issue, because that's the case that in those circumstances, more people in our community at one point were either hurt or killed as a result of domestic violence than anything else in any other set of circumstances. And the other part of that is most people don't necessarily understand kind of the bleed over effect that domestic violence has on children in our families. And so the victimization rate isn't just with the battered spouse. The victimization rate with domestic violence is much larger than just that. And so I will also talk a little bit about what we did with domestic violence in our community, and what we did with gangs, and what we're doing with addiction, and what we're doing with mental health, things that I think that prove to be effective and continue to be effective. They're not foolproof. They're not going to always be the way that things need. They're not going to answer every single question. But if we continue to just utilize the criminal justice system, I can assure you that Albuquerque is realizing the same thing that I talked about in our study, where the vast majority of people that the Albuquerque Police Department arrest, they're going to arrest over and over and over again. And every time they arrest somebody, guess what? There's another victim or more victims out there of someone who's been through the criminal justice system, on an average of 9-10 times. And they continue to go through it. And so your larger questions, folks, I think you have to ask larger questions. I'm just letting you know that. And the other thing I want to say, though, and this is still part of the pain part of this conversation, but I'm going to make a shift here, is that as long as we see our communities, or you see the Albuquerque Police Department, or any community sees their community or their police department as something, as a problem to be solved, or as something that needs to be fixed, you're not going to get too far. There's a whole new change model I think we have to convert to. And that change model, something we did in Longmont, and it's something I am making very clear, that because the old change model of seeing things as problems to be solved applies to how we see people in our community, applies to people of color, applies to kids, applies to people who have committed crimes. And we say, well, they're a problem to be solved. They're a problem to be fixed. We have to begin to shift that in a way where we begin to see communities and people as possibilities. And I'll explain what I'm talking about here. That's what we did in Longmont. And that's what the recommendation I'm making to everybody, every community that I talk with. Now, here's what I'm not saying. I know that there are people in Albuquerque who might be considered serial criminals, whether they're people who are committing violent crimes, property crimes, or both, hurting others, potentially committing homicides. those folks need to be dealt with by the criminal justice system. There's no question in my mind that if they've reached that point where they're potentially, I'm not saying they are, but potentially sociopathic or psychopathic, or in another way of saying it, they just can't help themselves. What has to happen from the police department's perspective and from the community's perspective is that those folks need to be removed from the community, not for the intent to punish, but for the intent of keeping your community safe. Now, I want to say another thing real quickly. I think there's 3 questions that need to be asked around how we move forward with this whole arena of public safety and how to keep, and what we need to do in terms of the relationship between police and the community. Number 1 is, how do we keep our community safe? Therein lies, it's a big question, I get that. Number 2, how do we minimize recidivism for offenders? And number 3, how do we help victims heal? How do we help them become whole? If those become the essence of questions that we're asking in our community, I can pretty much assure you that you will come up with answers that you don't have right now, that you are not working with. But typically we go from issue to issue, from crime to crime. And so then this looks at the cases, and this looks at the Albuquerque or any other community as a possibility. It doesn't look at it as a problem to be solved. But I recommended to Peter Kubra, Tom Molina, the Coalition for a Safer Albuquerque. I've had a few conversations with others in Albuquerque, that your whole community come together and start looking at this from the perspective of, how are we going to deal with these health and social issues? And what do we need to do from that perspective? And then underneath that framework, underneath that umbrella, you ask yourselves, what role does the police department play? What role do we want them to play? Because right now, just from the very interaction I saw tonight, and it's not unusual, there's no other resource. There's no other answer for a lot of the things that you ask the commander than the police, because they're the only 24/7 gig that's operating in your community that's going to be able to deal with us. So until communities get larger in their framework of asking questions, and until they begin to see their communities as possibilities. Now, let me just say that you're not going to change Albuquerque Police Department, and you're not going to change the city of Albuquerque. And I will go to the ends of my days believing this, seeing them as problems to be solved. I can assure you that there's a lot of goodness, there's a lot of great things happening in the Albuquerque Police Department. There's a lot of goodness and there's a lot of great things, as some of you mentioned tonight, happening in the city of Albuquerque. Well, let me come back to the framework of, how do we deal with our kids as parents? Do we deal, when our kid does something that we don't want them to do we say to them, or if a teacher comes to us and says, your kid's a problem to be solved, or we look at our kid as a problem to be solved, or we look at you got to fix your kid, or we got to fix our kid. How do we respond as parents when we hear that from a teacher, or potentially from a police officer, or from a truant officer, or from somebody else? We go, you know what? We know there's a lot of good things going on inside our kid. We know there's a lot of good things going on in our child. And what we end up doing as a parent often is we say, you know, there's a lot of good things that we would like to see get better. And I can tell you that there's no question in my mind, because I've seen it work not only with my 5 daughters, but I've seen it work with other things that have happened in Longmont, that when you focus on what's good and you focus on possibilities, that what's good will eventually crowd out what we don't want to see. Now, that there's nothing here that's an overnight dynamic going on. But if you want to continue going down the path you're going on in Albuquerque, in terms of invoking the criminal justice system and having the same results of seeing these people over and over again, and seeing people re-victimized over and over again, you can continue down that path. But I can assure you that the results are going to be the same that you have right now. And so there's got to be a shift. There's got to be a shift in the nature of conversations. There's got to be a shift in your perspectives. And this is what I was invited. You may not want to hear this, but this is what worked for me. This is what worked for my 5 daughters. This is what works, I would imagine, for kids, for parents on this Zoom session tonight with their kids. I'm not saying, though, that the criminal justice system should be kind of thrown out the window. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that when we begin to look at these social and health issues, and you begin to look at the woundedness in your community, that criminalizing that woundedness has been what's been going on for the last several decades. And here's where we're at today. I know that there's a rise in violence going around our country again. I get that. I keep up with that. Major cities, major urban areas, centers are experiencing increases in homicides, increases in violent crime. And the knee-jerk reaction has been more cops, more prisons, more aggressive policing. That's been the ebb and flow. I've been in the business for 40 some years. I was in the business for 40 some years. I've seen that cycle over and over and over again. And it's like we go from more aggressive policing. Okay, now we have enough of progressive policing. Let's pull back. Uh-oh, we pulled back too far, more aggressive policing. That has been the nature of the ebb and flow in the cycle I've seen over and over again. And I think we have to kind of figure out how to get out of that cycle. And I'm going to tell you, it starts with the community transformation of community prior for it to happen. I think that's just as important. I'll back that up. It's more important than what happens with transformation in police. I can go back into neighborhood after neighborhood in Longmont, and I can tell you we've had several neighborhoods in this community, several, where we would not send less than 2 police officers. Gang activity, drug dealing, violence, weapons. And what we ended up doing in each of those neighborhoods is we ended up working with those neighborhoods in a way, somehow there seems to be something going on in the Foothills CPC and their relationship with police in terms of building that neighborhood up so it becomes stronger. So there's more connection amongst neighbors. I'll call that social capital. And I want to talk about social capital for a minute here because there's a lot of dormant social capital in Albuquerque. And by social capital, I mean gifts, talents, skills, resources, expertise, people who want to make a difference. That's not been surfaced and activated. And if there's one thing that that Albuquerque police can do that we did in our community, is that we surfaced and activated that as a police department. We made it clear that we needed them to become, we needed more coalescing. We needed strength in neighborhoods. We needed neighbors to connect. And I can tell you a strong neighborhood is a greater deterrent for crime than having more armed guards any hour of the day, any day of the week. I can assure you of that. And when these neighborhoods that we wouldn't send less than 2 officers in became stronger, became to understand that they were a large part of the answer in terms of public safety, in partnership with police, that the crime rates significantly reduced, the calls for service significantly reduced. Neighborhood after neighborhood where we would go on hundreds of calls for service once they became stronger. And there's a formula here that I don't have time to talk about tonight, but there's a formula for how that works. And nothing about this is easy, folks. Nothing about this is easy because you're still dealing with most likely a lot of unhealthy dependency from neighborhoods on police. I pay your taxes. This is why I want you. I heard that a lot. And you know what? When we talked about partnership, our role was, our motto was policing in partnership with the people. What's partnership mean, folks? Partnership means let's say we were all members of a board of ABC Corporation and we were all partners. Partnership means joint accountability. Everybody has accountability. The community, the police, other entities within the city, other nonprofits, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody has accountability here, not just the police. The right to say no. The police have a right to say no. Wait a second. And we've said no to requests for services because we said, you know what? You don't need the police, you need a neighbor. And here's how we can fix this so that you don't have to call us. You don't have to be dependent on us. Here's how we can make this work. It was a long journey for every one of these neighborhoods to go from being unhealthy, have a dependency that was unhealthy, to being more healthy in terms of being stronger within themselves. And that social capital, all those gifts, talents, skills, resources, and expertise kind of surfaced and activated in a way that that healthy neighborhood began to sustain the solutions that we would go in and help them, to the point where one neighborhood that I can think of that comes across my mind, 200 calls for service every month. It wasn't a neighborhood, it was an apartment complex. It was an apartment complex that was full of domestic violence, full of gangs, full of drug dealers. It went from 200 plus calls a month to less than 10. And that's still sustained today. And so the question is, how do you do that? How do you do that? And there is a responsibility on the police department to, in fact, help make that happen. And one of the things that the police department has to do is to say, we're in this together. It's not, hey, if you need us, call us for anything and we'll come out and help you. And they go out and arrest somebody. Well, guess who's back in their apartment, in their home within hours or days? And guess who's going to be potentially re-victimized, to the point of going back to that study that I talked about, that I can assure you is no different in Albuquerque than it is in any other city. Every police department in America, every police chief in America will tell you that statistic of, we've seen these people over and over again. In our case in Longmont, on an average of 9 times for those people that we arrested. Is that the way we want to continue to do business? I know it isn't. Because again, none of us live our lives that way. Or we can choose an entirely different framework, an entirely different paradigm, an entirely different way of doing business that will require your police department to help out with that. But it's going to take the community to say, you know, we need to be part of this. We just can't call the police and say it's going to be us that does it all the time. And it's going to be the police that do it all the time. And so the community transformation is very, very important. And I will say it's more important than police transformation. So let me talk a little bit about police transformation. There's no question that we made a huge shift in Longmont. And we made a shift in many different ways. The profile of the person we hired, recruited and hired, how we trained, how we educated, the philosophy of leadership, performance management systems, how we supervised, the architecture of the organization, all had to shift if we were going to be working in partnership with the community. Now, I'm going to guess that the Albuquerque Police Department has pretty much a top-down kind of way of seeing how business gets done. But I bet you it's also shifting and changing as well. We had to make considerable shifts within our own police department so that our police officers felt like they had the authority to make decisions, and they had the authority that was commensurate with the responsibility that they had. And I love the fact that the commander is working with this group, and from the commander, from lieutenants, sergeants, officers, that's where the rubber meets the road in Albuquerque. To what level that's happening in every aspect, every segment of Albuquerque, you know the answer to that better than I do. But we made considerable shifts in the kind of people we hired, let me talk a little bit about the profile. The profile, one of the things that we really began to focus on was a candidate's capacity to be in a relationship with other people. We stopped hiring lone cowboys, lone cowgirls. We stopped hiring the people who, kind of wanted an adrenaline fix, or people who had the spirit of adventure. We really started looking for people who had the spirit of service. By the way, the average age of the police officer we ended up hiring is close to 31. And I tell you, me personally, hiring early 20-year-old police officers, people to be police officers, just didn't work for us. And these are folks that hadn't lived life long enough to experience significant rejection, significant disappointment, significant failures. And there's no doubt in my mind that needs to occur in our lives before we stop becoming the center of our own universe. And we needed to hire people who understood, they had a maturity about them, understood what service was, thrived in relationships, wanted to be in relationships. And I can go on and on about that aspect of that kind of profile of people that we began to hire, and how that played out in our community, because our police officers and our firefighters walked neighborhoods in our community. We carved out time for them to do that. And I personally walked with a friend of mine, Dan Benavides, over 200 neighborhoods over 5 years, Sunday mornings. I kind of I wanted to be the model for what we needed to be doing in our community as police. So every Sunday morning, Dan and I, up here in Colorado, in Albuquerque, I know you get cold weather, but we get really cold weather. We were mostly fair weather walkers. If it was below 40 degrees, we didn't go out because people wouldn't come outside and meet us. But we met over 4,000 people in those 5 years. The vast majority of places we walked, high density housing, apartment complexes, mobile home parks, Latino neighborhoods mostly. This is a destination point for a lot of undocumented people. Longmont is, and we dubbed our walks the Belonging Revolution, because we believed that if people really felt they belonged to our community, that they were more likely to make an investment and engage. Belonging has a couple of dimensions. One is relational. I belong to something. I belong to this community. The other is ownership. This community belongs to me. Now, for any of you who own a car, own your house, you know that you're more likely to take care of it if you were to rent your car or rent your house. Typically, people don't paint a rented house, or they don't really wash a rented car. But if people in your community feel like, especially in places where they rent, that they don't belong to their community, they're not likely to make an investment. And so we made an investment. The police department, fire department, public safety made an investment to encourage people to feel and believe that they belonged in our community. And so when we'd show up on their front lawn or their neighborhood, or sometimes get invited into their home, an amazing thing would happen. Why are they even here? Number one, why is the public safety chief here? Why is Dan Benavides, by the way, the first Latino city council person in Longmont? He was a city council person long ago, one of my best friends. So you have this kind of white guy and this brown guy going out into these communities, and that dynamic was powerful. I want to tell you, for the Caucasian people and for the brown people that we met, it was a powerful dynamic to see the public safety chief with a Latino person walking their neighborhoods, inviting them to, encouraging them to feel and believe they belong. And after every single neighborhood, after every single meeting, I'm sorry, that we always made an invitation for people to become engaged in our community. We had opportunities for them to become engaged. And I know Albuquerque has this kind of resource and infrastructure to figure this out. But 80% of the people not only said yes, but they said enthusiastically yes. I'm talking even about single moms, 2 kids, working a job, going to school. And what we realized is that everybody in our community have gifts. The other thing we realized is people wanted to offer those gifts. They just didn't know how. There was really no coordinated response. And so when I begin to talk about dormant social capital, that's what I'm talking about. Albuquerque has a population of 650,000 people. I bet you there are tens and tens and tens of thousands of people. And I would win this bet in Albuquerque who want to offer their gifts, but they don't know how. Who want stronger neighborhoods, but no one's kind of assisting and helping them to figure out how to make that happen. And maybe I'm not quite accurate on that, but I would bet there's a lot of neighborhoods in Albuquerque where people don't know each other, or there's not a lot of connection, or there's not a lot of coalescing, or they're not strong neighborhoods, or they're very dependent in an unhealthy way on government or police to come in and help them solve their problems. And so when I go back to this, when police administrators used to go out and say, hey, if you need us, call us for anything, and communities took us up on that, what we realize is a large percentage of the calls, and I know this is true in Albuquerque as it's true everywhere, doesn't have a crime attached to it. And I would bet that there's a lot of calls where people could probably utilize a neighbor or a strong neighborhood more so and more effectively than they would a police officer. I'm not talking every single thing, you know I'm not. But there's a lot of calls for service that the Albuquerque Police Department goes on where communities and neighborhoods would probably be more effective if they were coalesced and stronger than calling that same officer or those officers out time after time after time after time. And so I wanted to kind of jump into that and let you know that there is a huge responsibility for the community to consider what their role is in terms of this whole idea of how do you make your community safer. And I can assure you, because this happened in Longmont, that once a neighborhood becomes strong, and the police get it, they know it. And the relationship between police and a strong neighborhood is much different than the police and a neighborhood that's not strong. Because there's this power shift that occurs when the police know that there is power in this neighborhood to make things happen. There's power in people's voices. Their voice count. Their thoughts matter. They know their humanness is valued. That kind of strength shows up much differently in a relationship with police than the strength of, I don't know if my voice counts. I don't know if my thoughts matter. I don't know if my humanness is valued. And when we begin to talk about the power imbalance and domestic violence, I can assure you that's what happens as well. I'm very familiar with the dynamics of domestic violence in terms of what happened. Now, I talked about the pain before. Let me talk a little bit about something, here's what happened. In the 1990s, we experienced every year 2 to 3 women dying in our community as a result of domestic violence. There are a couple of years, 4 or 5 women died. Since we did what we did, and I can talk about that in an off conversation with somebody if they want to talk, and from 2000 to 2021, 2 people have died as a result of domestic violence. 2 total, still too many. And so I will tell you that often domestic violence is pigeonholed as a criminal justice system issue. It's something that we don't necessarily want to talk about. We definitely call the cops, and there's reason sometimes to call the police. But oftentimes we find that people don't get called as quickly as they should. Our study in our own community showed that people wouldn't call the police until the 8th time that they've been battered. And we know that the battering can get more serious and more serious as the batterings occur. We went from 450 plus gang members in our community to less than 70 as a function of what our community did, what the police did, what the school systems did, and what other entities within our communities did in order to minimize through prevention, intervention, and suppression what gang activity looked like in our community. So we had tremendous amounts of gang activity. Now gang activity, number one, the number of gangs members are minimal. The gang activity and crimes are rare. We went from, at one point when this community was not quite half as small as we are now, from 5,000 Part 1 crimes to almost 2,500 Part 1 crimes. Now, over the last few years, it's kind of inched up. And I think in 2000, we had 3,000 Part 1 crimes. But still, from a community that was almost half the size as we are, almost having, or I'll say 40%, having 40% less crime in that time frame, we did a number of things differently within police in our community to make that happen. And I'm convinced that it's a model that can work anywhere. I've had conversations with Los Angeles, New York. They're excited about the possibility of putting a belonging revolution in their communities. So, you know, the other thing that I just lost it for a moment there, it'll come back to me. But we made all of these shifts. It didn't occur right away. It took time. But our community became more responsible. The whole essence of what happened within police shifted from a fortress-like faceless entity circling the wagons to literally thousands of partnerships in our community. And by the way, we invited people. I mean, one of the things that we did within Longmont is that we made our police department our community's police department. Community members, including high school students, sat on police hiring boards. They sat on promotion boards. They sat on, if you want to transfer from one division, they sat on long-range strategic planning. By the way, when we did our first long-range strategic planning process, it took 18 months and included 1,000 members from our community. And that's why it took 18 months, because our police department, you know, they'd show up in a meeting, they sit at the back of the room or on the side. They, you know, kind of sit there like this. That's what I inherited. And then you'd have all these community members. Well, it took 18 months for those police officers to begin to think, well, maybe these people do know what they're talking about. Maybe we do need to have more conversations. I remember a specific conversation group that included kind of a really hard-nosed cop on the graveyard watch. And also in that group was the publisher owner of our newspaper. Imagine the initial conversations that would have taken place. You know, here's the cop sitting here like this. Why am I even here? And here's the publisher of the newspaper thinking he wants things to be transparent. I mean, his main goal is to make the police department transparent and to improve the relationship so that reporters and police officers could have a different kind of relationship. That's why it took 18 months, but it was worth it because we made a lot of shifts during that 18 months. We've had several renditions, but my point is the police have been involved in everything. They show up at our staff meetings. There's no secrets in our staff. They show up in our policy and procedure meetings. We have citizens who show up who make recommendations for certain kinds of programs. You know, it still kind of baffles me that police departments are having policy discussions about use of force, about pursuit policies, about other policies, and there's not citizen involvement there. And and citizen involvement that should be expected, not something, well, we'll try it. That's part of what the profession needs to be thinking about. That's part of the transformation. But keep in mind where the contextual history here plays a part. And that's how people, the unhealthy dependency, the get tough on crime, this idea that there's a blue line that the community has more or less said, we want you to be the difference between good and evil in our community. So this blue line kind of formed. I don't believe in the blue line. The blue line happens and it's real, but that's one of those lines that needs to be dissolved, because the blur that needs to occur between community and police needs to be just that. There shouldn't be this separation out of what the police do, how they do it, when they do it, where they do it, and the community having no say or little to no say, or knocking on the mayor's door, going in front of city council and saying, how come we're not, or experiencing a police officer involved shooting and wondering what the use of force policy says, or wondering when someone gets shot in a car that's moving, why did you shoot? And there's no citizens were part of the policy development. Police need to be less afraid, less concerned about citizen involvement, because I'll tell you when I first started, the whole idea of putting high school students on selecting police officers, I had police officers come in, you mean you're going to put these hormone raging, pimply faced people who have no life experience on a police officer selection board? These high school students blew the socks off the people who were actually the police officers and the sergeants that were on those police officer selection boards. They came back and said, they're amazing. They're astute. They're wise. They're beyond their years. I mean, we had our SROs, our school resource officers, help, hand select these high school students. But you know what? It was one of those things that we had to get beyond. And those kind of conversations weren't unusual. Every step we took along the way of making that blur come to life between our community. What are citizens showing up in our staff meetings for? What are citizens involved in the development of our policies and procedures? Why are citizens deciding whether or not an allegation of misconduct should get sustained or not sustained? Every aspect. Why are they on our promotion panels? We moved way beyond that. We reached a tipping point, or a police officer acceptance of that. One of the things I haven't talked about, I want to make this is the last thing I want to talk about, are all the shifts we made in terms of moving away from utilizing our criminal justice system for the human condition that we encountered every hour of every day, just like the Albuquerque Police Department. And I will tell you, we put programs in place like restorative justice. We've had 7,000 to 8,000 people go through restorative justice in our community. And I will tell you, there's not a community in America, I don't care how large or small, that has as robust a restorative justice process as we do in Longmont. Recidivism rates 70, 50, 60, 70% through the criminal justice system, seeing people 9, 10 times, to less than 5% in the restorative justice system. Now, I know you have a woman named Tanya who works out of the Albuquerque Police Department, who has a high level of frustration because she's been trying to get Albuquerque to utilize restorative justice. I don't know all the dynamics there. Apparently not working real well. We've actually used our restorative principles and practices with, in a big way, with folks struggling with their mental health and folks struggling with addiction. The effectiveness of that is unbelievable. And what we used to do in our criminal justice system in terms of, well, let's arrest people who have mental health issues and committed crimes. Let's arrest people who have addiction issues and committed crimes, pales in comparison with the effectiveness of using restorative principles and practices with dealing with folks who are struggling with addiction or struggling with their mental health, or both. And by the way, we know that a large portion of our unsheltered population also have either addictions or mental health issues, or both. We know that. And so there's a lot to be said about one of the things that I'm recommending to police departments all over the country is that you're going to have to pseudo detach from the criminal justice system, because that's the only system you've been attached to for the last several decades, because that's the system that the communities asked you, demanded you to be attached to, because we have passed all these laws. We stiffened all these penalties. We want you to get tough on crime. 3 strikes and you're gone. That's been the political message, folks, for decades. You don't find elected officials, though, taking any responsibility for that, as they're hammering police departments for the very same things they wanted them to do in the past. And so now the elected officials' message is, well, we need to figure out something else. And now there's been 2,000 laws introduced by states across the country, 50 states across the country, on how to punish police departments, how to hold police departments accountable for the same things these elected bodies in the past said, no, we want you to get tough on crime. We want you to be aggressive. That's how I started this off with police departments have been put in the middle of this. And that's why I mean, when communities need to figure out on a larger level how they're going to deal with their woundedness, than just say, let's pass a law or let's get more aggressive with policing. The larger community government, larger Albuquerque government, the community at large is also responsible figuring out how they're going to deal with the health and social issues, the woundedness they have, and then determine what the role of police is. It's not to fund the police. It's how do we utilize police in a way that's of greatest benefit to the community. But it's also, how do we utilize the social capital? How do we utilize these other professionals in mental health and addiction more effectively? I'll give you an example of what we did at Longmont. We have agreements and access to over 125 addiction treatment service providers. And we opened our doors to anybody who has an addiction, chemical substance addiction. If you come into the public safety department, we will find you treatment, whether it's residential or intensive outpatient. We've leveraged alone within public safety. It was upwards when I left of $4 million in free treatment, free addiction treatment for people who are struggling with addiction treatment in our community. It was amazing when we put that out there, saying anyone who wants to walk through, how many addiction treatment service providers, we want to sign up for that. We think that's pretty cool. We think that's great. And it's amazing what's happened with that. And by the way, that we called it the Angel Initiative. That Angel Initiative has cost the city 0 pennies. But we leveraged $4 million plus as of July of 2020 of social capital. So what police, public safety, government needs to get really good at is how to surface, activate, and coordinate that kind of social capital. Whether it's in neighborhoods, whether it's in service providers, you just can't do it, because I can guarantee you the mix of resources that you all have in Albuquerque, it's this big in terms of, I'll just take mental health, the service providers you have, it's this big. But the problem is as big as the room you're sitting in right now. And you're not going to fill that gap with more publicly funded resources. And so it's going to take a lot more social capital. And I'm not going to stop, I'm going to stop now, but that gap has a lot to do with the people in your community, the tens and tens and tens of thousands of people who can step up and say, I have a gift and I can help. And I know they're in there. I know they're there. The question is how does Albuquerque going to surface and activate that? Or are you going to continue down the same futile, pathetic path that almost every city is on, in terms of saying, okay, now that violence is going way up, let's knee-jerk react and get more aggressive policing. That's been the cycle we've been on. I've spoken enough. I'm willing to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike Butler. We appreciate it very much. our time is running a little bit short, and we do have one thing that Sergeant Silva would like to respond to just before we close. So I'll ask Sergeant Silva to wait for a little bit while we invite other members of our council or the public to ask questions of Chief Butler. Hearing nothing.
Chief Butler, this is Judy Young,
There
and
we go.
one of the things that I did is I did evaluations for UNM, and it was very clear that when we would make recommendations, you know, there was a line of demarcation as this person must be treated or they're going to reoffend. And if they weren't treated, it could be guaranteed that they would reoffend. And, you know, it seems to be that there are individuals that choice can't be left up to them. They have to be forced into treatment, but that doesn't seem to be happening.
And your question is, Judy?
My question is, one of the things that you had said is that there is, you know, there is a group of people that they cannot help themselves. And for those individuals, the public has got to be made safe from those
I agree.
individuals.
I agree.
So, you know, that would be something that I think this community could really use your consultation with, because there doesn't seem to be that line of demarcation there.
And so maybe I'm trying to understand this, Judy. You think that there are people in the community who are saying, let's give this person another chance, even though they've been through the system X number of times, have battered people, they've been through treatment in the past, let's give them another chance? Or what's
Yes, they reoffend over and over and over and over again, repeat
Right.
offenders. And, you know, they're a danger to themselves and to others.
Well,
And
I
yet-
am, yeah,
Yes.
I am of the opinion that if your goal is to keep your community safe, and until there's other modalities of treatment that we're not aware of yet, or we haven't been able to figure out or practice, I'm gonna say that those folks need to be removed from your community, and for a considerable length of time. I'm convinced about that, and you know, that may go against a little bit of what may seem to go against a little bit of what I said, but it doesn't. And so there's a lot of, we know there's a lot of dynamics going on here. And so, but if someone has shown over and over and over again that they are not safe to be in the community and that they're likely to re-victimize, they shouldn't be in the community.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that so much.
Andre, was there something recent in the chat?
Yes, Bob, there is, looks like 2 questions. First question is from Vicky. She asked, Chief Butler, do you have a police union? And if so, how do you work with them?
Great question. Thank you. Yes, I have a police and fire union. And actually, there's an organization called LEAP, the Law Enforcement Action Program, who did a feature. You can probably go to LEAP, did a feature on Longmont in terms of the model of cooperation that occurred between police management and the police union. And I will tell you that the FOP president, we have an FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, is also the statewide president. He and I are great friends. And we sat down a long time ago, and he doesn't get in the way of and nor does he let anybody else in the union get in the way of areas in discipline. We have not had one grievance filed. I take that back. We did have one grievance over a promotional process, but I'm talking years and years and years. People come and complain. He's willing to take the stance of, you know, here's your opportunity to become more engaged, show up at the next meeting, and let the staff know. By the way, all of our staff meetings, all of them are open to the staff too. We have no, quote, command staff meetings where the staff's not invited. I'd say 50% of the agendas are actually by people who are not command staff, are developed by people who are not command staff. But LEAP put us out there as we did a 45-minute presentation on here's how it worked. Here's how we worked it. And I'm not saying there aren't differences, there are. The union president, still the FOP president, Steve Schultz, and I have had some really great conversations around philosophy, policy. But one of the things that I found with lots of chiefs is that number one, there's a lot of chiefs that don't understand organizational development or dynamics. They don't understand how to shift cultures. They don't understand the pace of change. Many chiefs come in, throw a few programs down, they plop a few programs, saying we want to do this differently in the culture that exists, versus trying to figure out how to shift and change the culture. And then working with programs that are more in alignment with a shifted culture. And police chief after police chief that I've known, and I'm a member of PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, and LEAP, and we've had these conversations. A lot of police chiefs will get up and say, well, if I try something, the union will wait me out. And it becomes a program of the month. And it's almost like there's this futility in the police chief to try to do something because of all the other forces that are engaged there that keeps them from doing something. And so there's a whole new mindset shift that has to occur with police chiefs. And there's a whole new skill that has to occur. Most police chiefs have been your 20 game winning pitchers in your organizations. They've been great at doing a certain skill and they've done pretty well. But the largest jump is from number 2 to number 1 in the organization. Your sergeants, big jump, lieutenants jump, commanders jump, deputy chiefs, captain, whatever it is, jumps. But the largest shift is from, if you have a deputy chief, from deputy chief to chief. In fact, it's an aggregate that includes the aggregate and times 5 of all the other jumps that person made. There's a lot of skill sets. There's a lot of different mindset shifts that have to occur for police chiefs to be real CEOs, to understand the nature of organizational dynamics, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in budgets, how to make shifts from one way of doing business to another, how much change an organization can absorb at a time. Those are skills and arts that a lot of police chiefs aren't trained in, frankly. They don't, or they haven't been able to self-develop along those lines. And the PERF and LEAP understand and know that. And it's something that the police profession needs to work on.
Excellent. I'm going to jump into two other things that that have come up. One was something that you said, Chief Butler, about removing the individual from the community, not as punishment, but as a response to safeguard the community. And I'm going to guess also to safeguard the individual from their own worst possibilities. But Catherine asked a question about, or responded to the implication that maybe court-ordered mental treatment, it would be an alternative for many of these individuals.
It could very well be. And I don't necessarily agree that just because it's forced, it won't be effective. Sometimes that is the case. You want people to choose accountability, but sometimes they have to get to another place in their own emotions and their own mind before they can begin to choose that accountability. Now, let me go back to the first part of that, Bob, and say one of the things communities need to do is kind of help redefine the nature of justice. We can, right up until now, it's kind of been defined as a pound of flesh. I want justice, or an eye for an eye. Someone's been victimized, a media person sticks a microphone in front of their face. What do you want? I want justice. Well, they want a piece of somebody. And that's how we look at justice. Justice can be redefined and needs to be redefined by not only our community, but by our criminal justice system. Not as a pound of flesh. I'm not saying that, but if you're going to punish somebody, is that really punishment? Or is it? So, I mean, I take it that that didn't come out right. But I believe a higher value is keeping our communities safe. And I think it's a little primitive to say we're always going to be punitive. And I also think it's primitive to say we got the Albuquerque Police Department needs to be punished. You have to take the good of what the Albuquerque Police Department has, and I can assure you there's a lot of good, and expand it. Now, I will go back and say in my own career as a police chief, for the first 3 to 5 years, I was known as a firing police chief. I gave people opportunities for their voice to count, their thoughts to matter. And when people abused or took advantage of that and kept on doing that, I didn't want them around. You don't abuse your privileges and your rights. You have a responsibility, and if you don't take that responsibility, frankly, this isn't the organization for you. But it didn't take long, 3 to 5 years, before that message got clear that these are the kinds of people we want in our organization. We wanted people who could choose accountability. I wasn't going to try to demand it. I wasn't going to try to legislate it with lots of policies. I certainly wasn't going to try to purchase it. I wanted people in our organization to choose it, because ultimately that's the model that we want our community to use. We want people to choose accountability. We don't want them to say somebody else is going to take care of it for me. What's my role here? Citizens and communities can no longer blame their police departments, their leadership, whatever that looks like, and in the same breath declare their own innocence. That is a bygone way of doing business. Choosing responsibility has to occur everywhere.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And of course, one of the issues is that we lack some of the alternatives that the police need to have and that the community needs to have in a mature form, so that there are alternatives to just calling for a cop or just sending somebody to the county lockup.
You're right, Bob, and I want to make it clear there's nothing overnight about this, folks. It's a shift that's going to take time, but you got to ask yourselves whether or not going down the path you're on is really going to be effective. The answer to that is no, by the way.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chief Butler, and we really appreciate this.
Did Sergeant Silva have a question?
Yes, he does, and I'm going to call on him. And there's a question from one of our participants who asks whether you've made a presentation to the mayor, the council, and the police department yet.
I haven't been invited to do that. I've only been, I have a good friend in Albuquerque. His name's Tom Molina. I've known him for a long time. He apparently knows this guy named Peter Kubra, who I think you all probably know. And so I've been talking with the Coalition for a Safer Albuquerque, I think is the name of the organization. But no, I haven't done that yet.
Well, maybe they'll hear the question tonight and respond appropriately. Thank you very much. And I'm going to shift right along to Sergeant Silva, and I appreciate his hanging in there. The question was raised, what does security enforcement mean as a police function?
I may need a little bit more explanation around that. Security can take on a lot of different definitions, a lot of different. So maybe if I could get some more specifics from Sergeant Silva, I can answer that question.
No, I think there was a question at the beginning of the CPC meeting. Somebody saw a vehicle with security enforcement on the side, and it's not a APD vehicle. That's
Oh, okay, got it.
yeah, that's a Department of Municipal Development security vehicle. They look like APD vehicles, but it's a different department.
Okay.
And you do see those at the zoo and biopark and some other larger municipal facilities. But that's a good question. And unfortunately, it is easy. I'm saying unfortunately, but that's an editorial comment. It is easy to mistake those vehicles for a police car.
And I think ultimately that was kind of the goal in making them look like police vehicles so that, you know, they would be more of a deterrent. But I can see that it would be a concern since they do look very similar. And, you know, it could lead to false misrepresentation that that person is a police officer when they are not.
Sergeant Silva, does Albuquerque have take-home car program?
Yes, we do.
You know, in other places, and this is the 6th or 7th state that we've lived in, the states have very clear rules as to what private security can dress like and appear like. At one point in Colorado, if I remember correctly, private security vehicles couldn't be white because the state purchasing authority specified that all police vehicles.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, Bob. That's an area I wanted our police cars to be white, and
that the origin of that may have predated you. It was more than 50 years ago. But in New York, security people can't have badge type insignia. They have to have square insignia. They could look like a shield. In Minnesota, they couldn't have blue uniforms.
Well, let me just say that part of our community partnership includes a citizens volunteer patrol. Not a new thing in policing, but we have a bunch of citizens running around, and they're not the standard SUV, Ford Interceptor SUV, but they're white cars with police insignia on them, and the citizens have white uniforms. They have patches, etc. We've not had issues with that.
Okay. If there are no other issues, I think we have overstayed our welcome. Kelly wants to get on with his line.
I just want to say thank you to all of you for being the great citizens you are. It really is time for people in this country to reclaim their citizenship in a way that makes a big difference in our communities. It goes way beyond voting. Voting's important, but citizenship at a deep level has to be reclaimed. So,
an excellent closing point, and we appreciate it. Thank you very much, Chief Butler. And that being the time, our next meeting will be August 9th at 6 p.m. And I would entertain at this time a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Idalia.
Did you, I think Adalia made that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
And if there's an objection, please state it now, or we will declare it unanimous. Hearing none, The motion has been made, seconded, and passed unanimously that this meeting has concluded. And we thank you all very, very much for participation this evening. Thank you, and see you next month.
Thank you. Bye.